Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Rioch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Talk to Brazil is a leading business podcast. Talks with business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Rioch, an American known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my studio in Brazil. Today's guest, Talia Jacqueline, CEO of Visceral, joining us from Austin, Texas. Talia shares her most valuable lesson in business. Your value cannot be realized until you learned how to communicate it. Talia Jacqueline works with business leaders, entrepreneurs, their most valuable team members, helping companies generate the recognition, traction, and growth that they deserve. She was also a guest here at Café Networking Podcast several months ago. So Talia, your recent TEDx talk, Ditch the Pitch, Captivate People Beyond Your Words, has again inspired me. Tell our listeners about your experience and the content.
Thank you, Tom, for having me again. It's always so good to connect with you. I was really privileged and honored to be asked to do a TED Talk earlier this year by a good friend of mine who organizes them in Wilmington, Delaware. And, you know, the experience is something that I think almost every single business owner, entrepreneur, even professional should go through for the sole purpose of getting so specific with the one idea and the one message that you stand for, that you have to share with others. And it was such an interesting experience just in that, of going from what I thought was one idea, which turned out to be 5 or 6 or 7, to really narrowing it down. And that process was so extremely important for anyone that's in business. I think it was just, it really forced me, and my background is in communication. It really forced me to get really precise with what is the one idea and what is the one message that has to have one thought line from beginning to the end, right, that I want people to really take away. And gosh, I had a lot of fun writing it. I had, for TEDx, it's very timed. There's a lot of guidelines. It's very strict. And I've never really fully written out a talk before. I lean more on just like improvising it, right, being a little spontaneous, as we were just talking about earlier. And this was the first time that I wrote out one from start to finish. And the process is very interesting because, as you know, it's about 18 minutes or less, and you have to know it in your sleep. Right. You have to become the talk. And so the way that I did that was I wrote it out, and I wrote out every single thing that I wanted to convey. And then I deleted that and got to a very tight talk at the end. And then I went through the process of going through it 1,000,000 times. And then I went through the process of forcing myself to forget it and summarize it, because I kind of put a double pressure on myself, Tom, for this talk. For me, the pressure of just going out there and giving a talk that's 18 minutes or so long was one thing that I've never done before in front of an audience that big and a platform that big. But the second part that was a lot of pressure I put on myself was the actual title, Ditch the Pitch, is all about not having anything scripted and not having anything too memorized, and you being able to speak from the heart and improvise. And so the other side of it was actually walking my talk and practicing my preach, which that was probably the most stressful part, and the part that I had to learn in the experience of it all to get even more masterful at, I hope. So that was very interesting for me.
Well, you are a communication expert.
Yes.
So, and to all of us who feel in our audience, we feel we're experts in anything. There's always a chance to learn.
Absolutely.
And to the point of what you just mentioned, practice makes perfect. But practice and practice and practice and practice and more practice. I wouldn't say perfects it, but we do have to mentalize whatever our pitch. We've talked about this before. I talked about pitching in the sense of the content. You talked, and the last time I interviewed you talk, and you still do talk about the pitch as the tone.
Yeah, the pitch is the tone.
The pitch is the tone. So it's not really the what, it's how.
Yeah.
And that how are we perceived? How does that voice come across?
Yeah,
and one
absolutely.
thing like what I do in a podcast, it's audio. But when, TEDx, you're up in front of people. So it's not only the audio, it's the body, it's everything.
It's everything. It's really everything. And I think there's something to be said about getting your reps in no matter what. You have to get your reps in. It's like you're going to the gym for your mind, you're going to the gym for your body or your business or whatever it is. And so for me, choosing to do the TEDx experience was very much so a learning experience for me. There needed to be something I wanted to challenge myself with, something that I've never done before. And that was this. And so I agree with you. It's at whatever point of business or success you are in, there is always an area for improvement and learning. And I'm very grateful for the experience that I had with TEDx. It was really an out-of-body experience, as many people might say.
Mm-hmm. Well, you brought up a point that I wasn't really aware of. It's TEDx Wilmington that comes out of your TEDx. You said you went to Wilmington.
Yes,
we went to deliver. So the delivery was there.
It was in Wilmington, Delaware. Dr. Dan Young is the organizer, who also has an incredible TEDx training. He's one of the greatest teachers and professors that I know. And there were about 200, I would say, about 100 to 150 to 200 people there the day of. So it was a nice intimate setting. And there were about 24, if I'm not getting that number wrong, 24 other speakers and talks. So
24.
It was a full day, from 9 to 6.
Wow.
And they're all 15-minute increments with small breaks.
I didn't realize it was that way. Because obviously when we consume it, we see, an 18-minute presentation.
Oh, gosh.
And that's the way it's consumed. And it should be. It's 18 minutes, wherever, whatever.
Yeah. No, it's so funny because I actually, when you watch my talk, you'll see that I start out with, wow, I'm in awe of that song. And no one knows what the heck I'm talking about unless they were there. But for everyone listening, I'll give you a little hint. There was a gentleman, Donovan Moore, who's 22 years old, that was right before my talk. And we were both backstage together getting mic'd up, and he was ready to go on. And when he went on, he was talking about the power of using emotions and using music and writing music to channel through your experiences and your emotions and to heal them and all these things. And this 22-year-old brought out his guitar and sang an original song at the end of his talk. So when I got up on stage, I could not help myself but to acknowledge that. It was so incredible and so brave. And he's a very good singer. So that is who I was referencing when I started mine.
Well, your wow is a multiple wow.
Yeah, it is a wow.
It's wow for having seen or heard someone else, but it's also a wow of being there. It's a deserved wow of your first time.
Yeah.
So that experience, I think, the thing I could guess, you've gone through it, so you know what that means.
Yeah.
But the question I want to ask, Wilmington, you're from Austin.
Yes.
Being in another place, and obviously Wilmington's still in the United States, but when you're talking to publics, let's say a public, did you prime yourself because you were in Wilmington, or does that have anything to do with it? Does it matter?
No. I don't think it mattered. I think at the end of the day, for me, when I'm in front of a person, I just look at them as a person. And I really have a lot of love for people. And that's something I hope really came through when I was talking. The message that I shared around Ditch the Pitch is something that's very, very deep in my heart. But all of the people there, I mean, I happen to know quite a few people because I knew a lot of the other speakers and I knew some people in the audience. My mother, God bless her, flew down to the Caribbean. So it was a very warm audience. And that made it for a really special day.
Well, I watched. I didn't hear your mother stand up and say, "That's my kid." Huh?
She's a humble little British woman.
No, but that's even more pressure.
Yeah, it was really special. It was very
it is special. And I've watched it, as I mentioned before we came on air. I've watched it, I've rewatched it.
Yeah.
And rewatching also brings me more value each time I watch it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I'm also watching it from the point of I'm watching and seeing a professional communicator going through this, which now I can understand if you just shared this. It's probably a high stress moment. Stepping on stage. I'm a speaker, and I've always known, the first time you step on stage is an experience. The adrenaline and everything else, and all of that. What you mentioned, you have a time constraint, you have a thought process, and I'm the type of speaker too. I'm spontaneous. I used to prepare speeches, and then I learned, well, throw them away. Throw them away. Why? Because every time you're in front of a different audience, and you feel the feedback from people, and that's to the point of different places. An audience generates an energy that we capture as a speaker.
Very true.
So you're talking your mother's in the audience, other people.
That audience was full of love. The audience really made it very welcoming for the speakers, including myself. It was just a very different type of environment. I didn't expect that part. I thought, as you're preparing, a lot of the times you're told for TEDx that the lights are very bright because it's a production, so you can't see any faces. And I was really kind of mentally preparing myself to feel a little disconnected from the audience. But in fact, the lighting was perfect, and the room was just everyone was so present. Everyone was hanging on every word. There was a real dedication to the speakers and to learning that day. And it really made for such a beautiful experience. I think that the audience really contributed to that.
Well, you can feel it. You can feel the energy. Sometimes you can't see it.
Yeah, but you can feel it.
You could feel it.
Yeah. And for me, Tom, this was the largest platform that I've spoken on, but leading up to it, I thought I was incredibly nervous a few days before. What surprised me was the day of, and this is really a recommendation for anyone that's ever doing public speaking. The day of, I didn't look at anything. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't look at the talk. I didn't rehearse. And all that I did was focus on how grateful I was for the experience itself. I mean, I was sharing a big part of my own personal story and how I came to be an expert in communications. And it was really it was a wow moment of how grateful I am to have been given the opportunity to have someone's attention for 15 to 18 minutes. How many things can I squeeze into that? That was my objective. How many insights can I squeeze into this thing so that people walk away with multiple awarenesses around their pitch and their communication?
Well, that's a good tip for anybody. And from my side, in my Café Networking Podcast, where my focus is trying to convince people they need a pitch in terms of saying something within a time frame. And the pitch in modern times, when you're talking about virtual communication, when you're talking about money that can come from risk partners, they want to give you 5 minutes to convince them why they should give you $1 billion.
Yeah.
And what I have seen, I was very recent, last month, I was actually, they invited me to judge a startup situation here at the American Chamber in Brazil. So I was actually virtually able to see 10 pitches and follow through and evaluate those. But to your point, what many people and many pitchers do is really they keep trying to cram more into the 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The time limit, where your point is don't think about it the day. Forget it. Rehearse it. And what you said, rehearse. Yeah. So if you've gotten, or somebody gives you 5 minutes, use 4.
Yeah.
Or take something out. Everybody tries to put more in.
Yeah. So I have an interesting philosophy on this, Tom. I think there's a very big difference between an 18-minute talk or a 15-minute talk that is a production at the end of the day, and a pitch when you're out networking and you have a couple of minutes to captivate someone's attention. So I want to make a distinction between that, because I think for both, you do have to practice. You do have to get your reps in, But going back to your question around the content and what I'm so passionate about is when you're out networking and you get asked that question, what do you do? And you have to give your pitch, or you're on a platform that you're, obviously pitching to investors, or there's some type of pitch competition for capital. That is where I actually don't want people to be practicing and rehearsing and trying to make it all perfect, because that's where, again, the emphasis is on the words and how they are being scripted versus the delivery and the emotion and the tone. And so if you watch the TEDx, I go through a process around how you should present yourself. How I recommend you present yourself when you do have the opportunity to tell somebody what you do. And it's actually the opposite of rehearsing and practicing and mastering and memorizing your pitch.
No, and it's to that point. It's the tone.
It is.
And it's in anything, how we say what we say. It's actually not what we say. And we talked about that before. See a picture and that's the first impression.
Yeah.
But those words, those first words that come out of our mouths are part of that first impression.
It is. It definitely is. And, it's interesting because for the past decade, I would say in the business world, we've gone from, don't focus on how you do what you do, focus on what you do. Don't focus on what you do, focus on why you do it. And I think that's, in large part a tribute to Simon Sinek, which has really changed the game and how people look at the way they present themselves. And I think there's a lot bubbling right now in the business world around moving from the why to the who. And that was a big part of what I discussed too, because I do believe that is where your tone comes from. When you know who you are and how your experiences have molded you to be who you are in business, that changes your delivery. And when you're focusing on who you're talking to, which you're very good at when you're interviewing and talking to people, that also changes the dynamic and the conversation between you and the other person. One of the things I love teaching companies is something called conversational intelligence. It's a training that I have that I freaking love, because it's all about how do you go from pitch, so ditch the pitch, and how do you create conversation starters? How do you create meaningful conversations that become these really, really awesome relationships from that? So anyway, we're going to try.
No, but that's it. And my success, I think part of it has come from really the how you say. I learned that because here in Brazil, I'd had to learn another language. I also speak in another language. I speak in Portuguese. Most of my business life was here in another language. And that's really what I learned, what you mentioned about the tone, the delivery.
Totally.
In Brazil, that's different. A delivery in Brazil, in Portuguese, is completely different from the same thing in the States or in other countries. So it has to be fine-tuned. It should be fine-tuned. We're talking to a global audience. It's really not one thing. It may be Wilmington, but it may be Shanghai.
Yeah.
So how, and understanding that cultural part, thinking about that before, because obviously we think we know how to talk to mom.
Yeah.
Right? But we have to speak to everybody else. And things have been received differently from mom.
Absolutely.
And I learned that. So what I could do or say out in the world could be, but I had to be aware here of the tone.
Absolutely.
Of the way, the presence. And that's important, not only here in Brazil, other places in the world.
Absolutely.
So as businesses go forward, and back to what you do, actually, besides the TEDx, you help teams and you help companies understand all of that.
Yeah, understand how to use tone, because you know what else is shifting in our business world, Tom, is this whole introduction and launching of AI and how much that's going to create this content creation, expedited content creation and all the other things. And it's an amazing tool. However, if at the end of the day, what people experience from you online is not the same as what they experience from you offline, and you don't know how to use tone, I think you're going to have a really hard time in business moving forward, because there's more and more or less of a humanized component to the way we communicate. And I don't think it's going to cut it if you don't know how to use tone, not just in your messaging, but in your actual in-person communication.
And I agree. I couldn't agree more. But even now today with the technology, so I'm here in Brazil, you're in Austin, we're talking, we can see each other.
Yeah.
Our podcast audience will hear us. They
Absolutely.
won't be able to see us. But we do have to be more aware of that.
Absolutely.
And we have to be, again, culturally, it's different everywhere.
Absolutely. And it's funny because in a lot of companies, a lot of people will use that phrase, we've got to set the tone. We've got to set the tone for the meeting. And they say that, but then they focus on agenda. Like, here's it's the opposite. So it's just, these are the things that I find I pick up on because I look for them. And it's like, are you setting the tone or are you making people tone deaf? Are you making people tone deaf, really, at the end of the day? So that's just, if you're listening, that's a funny thing to just kind of think about, reflect on.
Well, there's another funny thing they'll bring up because my name is Thomas, right? Thomas Rioch. Yeah. And in the States, everybody called me Tom. So it was Tom, T-O-M, Tom Rioch, Tom Rioch. Here in Brazil, I was always known as Thomas or Tomás. And when I came here, if I would use my word Tom, in Portuguese, the pronunciation of Tom, T-O-M, is tom.
Oh, interesting.
Tom. But when you go to the dictionary, T-O-M in Portuguese is tone.
Oh, interesting.
And this after and before talking to you today, back to the origin. So Tom outside is one thing. It's T-O-M, it's a name. Funny. In Brazil, tom is tone.
Hilarious. That's funny.
Hilarious, but it's always my thinking point because when I think about Tom and tone, I think about you. And
I love that.
So and that's it. So it's tone. When I was saying tone, why wouldn't people understand me? I'm telling them my name, but I was saying a word that for them was tone.
Oh, that's so funny.
So they would say, well,
that's
tell
great.
me your name. And so we get Thomas, Tomás, and whatever else. But
that's great. I love that.
So we need to learn every day. We need to, and practice makes perfect. So
Yeah.
When's the next talk?
Yeah, everyone's asking me that. I think I'll probably do something else next year. This year I've got a lot going on with a lot of the programs that we're launching, and there's going to be a Ditch the Pitch training and course for people that will just be available on the web. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot. I think this year we're at the brink in terms of capacity, but I'll definitely be doing another one. I really enjoyed the process of writing it. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I would enjoy it that much. So for me, it's definitely, it'll be in the near future.
Well, I enjoyed watching it. I've learned, and again, it's a continual learning experience because we see those, we participate, and we see that, I'm not saying on a daily basis, but people who have done it make you aware that I've done it, I've been here, and they're fantastic. I think they're inspiring. I haven't seen one that isn't inspiring and motivational.
They're so inspiring. And you know what? It gave me even more respect for people that go through this process because I think I wrote a post about this leading up to the TEDx experience because it made me think a lot about how in life we're really given the finished product. Mm-hmm. Somebody listens to your 20-minute podcast, finished product, edited, gone through the whole 9 yards. Somebody watches a 15-minute talk, doesn't realize that there's like 6 months, if not your whole life, that goes into the making of it. We watch a movie that's 2 hours and takes 3 years to produce. It's
millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars. Like, it's so interesting. And it gave me a deeper respect for, just everything that we get, everything we get to experience in life and what really goes behind the scenes in the making of it. I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to ever do a TEDx talk or give a keynote or do whatever, I think it's a really humbling experience. You learn a heck of a lot about yourself.
Well, I've learned a lot. So how can our audience learn more? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. Our main website, Visceral, Visceral co.com. My personal website, taliajacqueline.com. And we're most active on LinkedIn. So if you want to hop on and connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with me personally on LinkedIn, there will be a lot of really valuable content that we're sharing that maybe you'll get just as much out of.
Very good. Well, thanks again for sharing. Thanks again for being here. Congratulations on your TEDx.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you.
Very good. And to our listeners again, it's Talia Jacqueline. It's TALIA JACQUELINE. So TaliaJacqueline.com. Find the TEDx Talks, which is Ditch the Pitch, Captivate People Beyond Your Words. Thanks to our listeners and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, FOCUSMI.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Rioch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.